something within the hearing of it. So 3, Laura. 3, 2, 1.
That was so out of sync.
It'll be fine. Do you know what we'll do is we're gonna go. I'll say 1, Ben, you say 2, Laura, you say 3, Simon, you say 4. This is so low budget. Okay. All right. 1,
2,
3,
4.
I have no idea what that's achieved.
Welcome to Beer Christianity. My name is Jonty.
And I'm Drabs.
I'm Laura.
And with us we have Simon Cross. Simon, welcome to Beer Christianity.
Hi.
It's almost too fulsome and enthusiastic a greeting. It's just like you overwhelm me, Simon.
I get that a lot.
The reason that Simon is on the podcast is mainly because we were having a bit of an argument on social media, and we came to this beautiful place where I think we both agreed on something theologically, which was actually quite nice. In terms of a concept that you introduced called the blessing of plurality. Is the blessing of plurality, if I understand it correctly, and tell me if this is wrong, it is that God can work legitimately through sometimes seemingly or actually conflicting viewpoints and ways of being Christians, ways of being church, and that seemingly or actually conflicting interpretations of things like scripture or ideas of who God is can be equally valuable, or is the equality there a red herring?
I think there's a lot to there's a lot to unpack from that question. So, in the first place, I probably don't want to get into all of this, but in the first place, this idea of God working through things has an implicit assumption about the nature of God in it, which I would want to perhaps pick apart a little bit. But all the same, the sort of fundamental thing of what you've just said, yes, of course, the Bible is full of conflicting voices. The church is full of conflicting voices. Nobody has a full handle on the truth, right? The truth is multifaceted and multidimensional. And so we need to hear all those things. That it's not a question of, let's just sort of get the good bits of whatever. We need to hear all those voices. Everybody needs to be heard in order that we can get a fully rounded picture of what's happening. So I suppose, to simplify the kind of idea of how God works, I would say that like Alfred North Whitehead talks about the lure. And I think there's the sort of the lure towards goodness. I think, lots of people are following that lure, and let's celebrate that. Let's recognize that they have different ideas and perspectives about what they're doing and how they understand things. But let's celebrate it. Let's listen to one another. We're not all going to agree. Let's just accept that and keep going together. I think that's kind of the approach that I'm taking.
Are there limits to what you're willing to celebrate?
Well, there's always limits. So, as much as anything else, there are going to be linguistic limits. There are. Are you asking me if there are absolutes? Is that what you're asking me?
No, I'm asking you if, despite the kind of desire to celebrate many different perspectives, you would find racists and sexist perspectives hard to celebrate. And are you, and I guess what your reasons are for that?
Yeah. Okay. So definitely. There are some points where there are lines that I would draw. I would draw them though in the recognition that in 100 years' time there will be lines that people will draw where they will say he was on the wrong side of this really clear line. there are definitely things which I think are quite obviously harmful, hurtful, go against this lure to love, this drive to be loving towards people, to be inclusive, all those sorts of things. Sorry, I'm slightly distracted by the sort of banging from above me.
That's the Lord, Simon, trying to call you home.
Again.
All right, trying to call you to the truth.
Yeah, if there's a thunderstorm now, that's it, isn't it? That's what it is. I've had this before.
That time I got swallowed by a fish.
Oh man,
Genuinely annoying.
That was so annoying. Yeah, so yes, there are definitely lines that I would draw, and racism, sexism, homophobia, any kind of activity that intentionally excludes or hurts people. Those are things I would find unacceptable. But I would seek to articulate that in a way that is discursive and that is that lures people towards the good. So, for instance, I in the sort of community work that I do over, I don't know, however many years I've been doing community work, I've worked with all kinds of people from a variety of political and faith perspectives, and so most recently, of course, we've got lots of UKIP people who live in my area. And I've worked with them, and yes, of course, we disagree on particular things. There are ideas that they hold sacred that I would say were really kind of really wrong, effectively. But I would seek to challenge those things in the light of the fact that I know that those people are also committed to helping their communities, to doing good, to seeking human flourishing, and so on. But they've got a plank in their eye, just in the same way as I have. And as I say, I think in 100 years' time, people will say things about our generation that we can't see right now.
But fuck those guys. I think that's the important thing that we need to kind of stand by at all times. Okay, one more question from me, and then I will actually let somebody else speak.
I mean,
but
swearing is totally.
Yeah, no, I mean, nobody's ever brought that up with me, Simon, so it's never really had to have that conversation with a Christian.
No, I'm sure you have.
But so that's the easy stuff, is we're not going to draw a line around, we can draw lines and we can be very clear about the stuff that's harmful to people. What about ideas that are, if they are true, again, discussing whether there is such a thing as absolute truth, but say somebody holds a thing about, they believe, like an evangelical might or a classical evangelical might, that if you don't have a personal relationship with Jesus based on some kind of decision, then you will go to a place of eternal conscious torment, and therefore mission budgets need to be spent on evangelism, and churches need to be doing very specific and definable ways of getting people into relationship with Jesus. How do we coexist when there is competition for resource allocation in that kind of sense, and how do you include people like that in this vision of plurality meaningfully?
I think a lot of people exclude themselves from that
True.
vision. So, if people are absolutely determined that actually their way is the only way, that there is only one kind of meaningful form of activity, they're not interested in dialogue. You go to an interfaith dialogue and see who's there. There's only certain types of Christians who turn up. It's not because everybody is excluding other people, but they exclude themselves. They won't take part. And if you ever try and do one of these things and get particular groups engaged, it's almost impossible. So I wouldn't seek to exclude anybody on those kind of grounds. What people do with their money, I might critique it, but it's up to them. It's not up to me. that I don't really have a kind of a horse in that race. I kind of just say, well, you guys, it's up to you. If you want to be part of this, then you're very welcome to be part of it. If that's the case, but mostly they just don't want to be part. So
absolutely, they are self-excluding.
Yeah, I mean, I've been to events on discussions on sexuality, for instance, and people just self-exclude themselves from those discussions because they don't want to be part of it, which is a huge shame because their voices are important and need to be heard, even though they have things to say which are potentially hurtful to other people. But what everybody has to understand is that what the so-called progressive points of view are, they could be hurtful to those who hold conservative views, or deeply hurtful in some cases. So,
because how do you celebrate those more conservative people in a meaningful way? Can you celebrate views like that in this glorious plurality?
I think there are things you can celebrate. So for instance, like in this current project, I have got a lot of issues with terms like Lord or ideas of sovereignty and those kind of things. So I would never seek to use those kind of terms, and in fact, I think they are dangerous and potentially harmful. However, I recognise that for other Christians, they are really, really important and really meaningful. And this has happened. I've got people come along and say, well, I've got this song or this poem or whatever it might be, and it uses that kind of language, then, that gets included, even though it goes at times quite starkly against my own kind of approach. I don't see my own approach as being so important that it should exclude their, in many cases, well thought through views just because they differ from mine.
And are wrong.
Well, I mean, we're all wrong. Everybody's wrong. That's the one thing we know, right? We think we're right. We know we're wrong. We don't know what we're wrong about. But for absolute definite, we'll all be shown to be wrong eventually. So there's no point in being stuck up about it.
Is there a point in trying to get it right, in trying to strive for truth? Or should we just do whatever the hell we feel? Intellectually, I mean.
Well, I mean, I think there's always a point in trying to strive for truth. However, it does always mean that you have to give people some leeway because people disagree on what truth is, right? So, within academia, people disagree hugely, but these things are just sort of expected. Nobody expects everybody else to agree with them. Within the church is different. So theology academically is discussed, and disagreed on quite amicably, and then in the church, all of a sudden, it becomes a kind of a war, a battlefield, and that's a shame, I think.
Yeah.
Oh, is that your one question done, Jonty?
That's my one question done.
Okay, so we touched on church there. I mean, what does church look like for you ideally, and is it as simple as you're suggesting? Are people more attracted to this kind of plurality, or actually does it make it harder to find meaning without having a creed essentially to rally around?
Yeah. Okay. So I think if you want a successful in terms of numbers and size and money and all that sort of thing, church, then probably the best thing to do is to have a really straight piece of dogma that and some really good social controls in there to keep people in line. Keep them coming.
Slow down. I need to write this stuff down. This is great.
I mean, you don't have to look very far to find these places.
Dude, I'll bring you on Sunday. Actually, we don't even have, it took me months to work out what they believe. So it's like...
Do you know now? Have you worked it out?
No, I actually think they're pretty weirdly close to what you're saying. I don't think they're that fussed about telling people what to believe. And they seem to be profoundly tolerant of difference. I think because it's so multicultural, to be honest. They kind of have to be.
A lot of millennials in there too.
A lot of millennials and a lot of Ghanaians and Nigerians and international students in the Oxford one. And yeah, it's weird.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, no, I wasn't really referring to your church because, let's be honest, I've never been and I don't know it. So I'm thinking of other places that I do know a little better. And I think that, honestly, the difficulty, if you want to have that kind of model of church, with having a sort of really open and plural outlook, is that it does beg the question, why do we go? Why do we need to be here?
Yeah.
You know,
absolutely,
because generally it's not all that fun, and there's other things we could be doing. And unless you've got your social controls in place, which say there are good reasons for you to be here, then it's not a strong offer, is it? But my view on church, I guess, would be more multi-faceted than that. I would say that church exists all over the place. It doesn't just exist in particular buildings. And I would say that Christians need to sort of open their eyes as to who are the people that are doing, if you like, to use one phrase, God's work. You know, who are the people who are doing those things? Who are the people who are caring for the sick, and who are the people who are looking after other people, and who are the people who are feeding the poor and all that? It's not just the Christians, right? They're not the only ones who are doing it. Far from it. Lots of other people are too. We need to make common cause with them. I sometimes tell a story about. I sometimes tell a story. That sounds really highfalutin. I sometimes tell a story.
I'm going to start a sentence like that one day. I sometimes tell a story.
That's such a pretentious way to start a sentence. I feel embarrassed.
When I'm being interviewed on podcasts, I sometimes tell the story.
Yeah, exactly. That's what it is, isn't it? The real beginning to that sentence is, I sometimes give a paper at conferences about, or I have given a paper at conferences about the trans-universal zombie church of the blissful ringing in Slovenia, which is a kind of a fascinating socio-political movement that was started in the sort of Occupy era. And basically, they worship a deity called I think it's called the Blessed Pot, or something like that. And what they do is they have their worship services by standing outside the government main government building, hitting pots and pans, and do sort of weird stuff like that. And then they collect a load of food and clothes and that sort of stuff and distribute it. And they exist effectively as a kind of political protest movement. But what they're doing is deeply kind of Jesus shaped. It's just using very kind of troubling language for a lot of Christians. So all of their sentences have to end in bong as well, because it's a thing they do. So it's for a lot of Christians really troubling, but I think really beautiful as well. I think we've got a lot to learn from those zombie church people.
I mean, it sounds amazing. I just, can you imagine how awesome it would be if they loved Jesus?
Well, I mean, I don't think they've got anything against Jesus.
I know. For me, because I believe in kind of eternal salvation and, all of that kind of, evangelical stuff that...
So what do you think they are, sheep or goats?
Oh, I don't know. I couldn't possibly tell. It depends on how they treat the poor, I believe how...
I've just told you how they treat the poor.
Then they're fine. Then they're sheep. They're all right. But would they, in a kind of progressive Christian vision, does Christianity offer anything to somebody? Does the person of Jesus, any concept of relationship with God, in God being a personal, deity, does it offer you anything more, or is it just good people are good people and that's it? I'm not trying to force things into the evangelical. You're either in or out. Or you either love Jesus and it really doesn't matter what kind of dickhead you are, or if you don't, then it doesn't matter. But like, is there anything that would benefit them by an encounter with Jesus Christ or with the truths that you found in Christianity?
I think they're probably encountering Jesus all the time, in the same way as we all do, in the face of the people who are suffering and all that sort of stuff. They don't necessarily know that in the language that we would use, but I think they have encountered Jesus and probably do as much as I do, or perhaps even more. The idea that somehow people who are of a different culture or a different way of thinking are somehow less able to encounter God it seems crazy to me. I don't think that holds at all. I might not be answering your question, so let me just sort of spool back on it.
But you're using some fairly strong language about not able to encounter it, which makes a rhetorical, great point, if nothing else.
Well, I'm pleased to hear that. I mean, does Jesus have anything unique to offer? I guess that's one of the questions, isn't it? So people say, well, why read the Bible? Why don't you just read, Tolstoy or something like that?
Why Tolstoy? Why not Cosmo?
Yeah, indeed. Why not Cosmo? I've never read Cosmo, so I don't know what truths it holds.
It's no Teen Vogue, which is super Marxist these days. You'd love Teen Vogue right now, I'll be honest. But
has it got some good skincare stuff in there? Because I feel like I'm in my mid-40s now. I need to sharpen up my act. Teen Vogue doesn't seem right though. Somehow
Teen Vogue is
Teen
amazing.
Vogue is all about Either Rich right now. It's excellent.
Really?
Teen Vogue's incredible right now.
You should look up Teen Vogue.
Legit.
Okay,
Yeah.
I mean, I write for magazines sometimes, so perhaps.
Dude, they would love your stuff, but you may need to go a little bit more tanky, and then you'll be fine.
Okay.
It is excellent, genuinely.
We've kind of moved away from the subject of Jesus, but that's okay. I think it was me that accidentally moved us away from that. But of course, Jesus is the kind of ultimate role model. Oh, that's right. I remember how we got to Teen Vogue now. Jesus is. There is no greater expression of that way of living, I think, than Jesus. And I think there are very few people who I've ever met who would kind of disagree with that. What they have a problem with is the church. They have a problem with some of the kind of Pauline doctrine or how they understand it, how it's being expressed to them. But there's very few people who, on the face of it at least, seem to have any kind of major problem with Jesus.
I guess, yeah. I feel like this kind of thing of plurality, I can't even speak, plurality, something that like my generation, I feel like especially, is kind of had forced down our throats, is the idea that, we're all treated as snowflakes and, we shouldn't necessarily spend time like listening to others like, I don't know, opinions or whatever. So is there ever an occasion that you find it unhelpful to kind of not have to listen to everyone, but like, I don't know, prove that point wrong of like, we should like, is it worth genuinely taking time to listen to everyone, or is it ever unhelpful?
Yeah, I guess some people are probably unhelpful. I a few people are springing to mind now as we speak. But so here's a funny kind of thing. I nearly said here's a funny story, but it's not a funny story because I don't really tell stories, as you have discovered.
Unless you're on a podcast.
Unless I'm on a podcast, yeah. No, I think as over the years, as I've kind of read things which have challenged me and have kind of taken me out of my comfort zone, like, I don't know, first time I ever read Marcus Borg or something like that, and I thought,
oh, what a hero.
But when I first read Marcus Borg years ago, I found it really kind of discomforting and worrying. And so what I found that I did was I then immediately picked up something more conservative, like N.T. Wright or something like that, I guess it would have been at the time. And I sort of read a bit of that, and then I felt a bit more kind of comfortable again. And then I was able to go back to Borg or Crossan or whoever I was, sort of trying to understand at the time. And now I would find that, N.T. Wright helped me to deal with some of those kind of early ideas. Whereas now I wouldn't find it helpful to read N.T. Wright at all now, personally. I mean, I think it's the kind of theology that I've moved away from. But at other points in my life, it was massively helpful, and I think that's true of a great deal, isn't it? That's how we learn things. It's like the shape of the earth. I sometimes talk about the shape of the earth and the way that we understand the shape of the earth. So when we're really small, we think the earth is flat because it just looks flat, and that's absolutely true. It does look flat and or looks bumpy, or whatever. It's kind of flat. And then you have this kind of moment of realization when somebody shows you a globe and you think, oh, wow, it's round, it's amazing. And then you get to kind of A-levels or whatever it is, and they say, oh, you've been taught it's round, but it's not. It's an oblate spheroid. And so it's like a rugby shape or whatever.
It's not
oblate spheroid.
Okay, Ben, you're just going to have to take it slow for him. Spoilers. It ain't round.
Yeah, so it's kind of squished. So you think, oh, wow, it's blown my mind again. What a fool I ever was to think it was round, And then you go off to university and study astrophysics or whatever, and they say, of course, the shape of the Earth is entirely relative depending on what speed you're travelling. If you're travelling at light speed, then it's all squishy and doesn't have a form. And you think, well, this, all of these things helped me to understand things at different points in my life. None of them were wrong, but they were all just sort of stages in my learning. And I think that's the way I would look at these things. I would say I think that most things are useful. There's not much that I would say don't read or don't engage with, but don't expect it to stay with you for the rest of your life.
It's interesting because you say none of them were wrong, and I think it's kind of like advice I got being a pensions trustee. That's right, baby, I'm a pensions trustee.
Wow.
Where they were like, you should minute your decisions, but you shouldn't minute the reasons, because you can't be held, you can't essentially be sued or imprisoned for making a decision, but you can if the reasons for it were wrong. So if you just minute the decision, and it's kind of like, you weren't wrong to believe the world was flat unless you go into detail about why and saying and kind of your thinking behind it and going like, I do actually think it's a disk floating through space. At that point, then you are objectively wrong. But if you're just like, I think it's flat and kind of leave it at that, keep it vague, you can't be wrong. Is there something to that?
Well, I guess, but I mean that does set out that there are right and wrong ways of looking at things. So is the world flat? And in a sense, yes, it is.
Is it a disk floating through space?
Is there an ice wall?
Is it a disk floating through space? I've never believed that. Even Terry Pratchett.
Yeah, but there are people who do, and they are wrong.
Yeah,
I feel like we've gone down an interesting tangent right now.
I mean, I don't want to give shit to the Flat Earth Society because I think everybody gives them shit, and actually, like, they seem like very nice people to me. And of all the problems in the world,
why do they believe that? I'd really love to understand why they believe that and what leads them to believe
wise up,
that.
sheeple. All right, it's just
no. I mean, I'm sure they've got something interesting to put into the conversation, but yeah, no, it's not something that I would believe.
Or like, vaccines cause autism.
Yeah, no, that's a really tough one, isn't it? That's a really tough one
because that seems like
that's
damaging,
a really dangerous way of thinking.
Indeed. Yeah. Or plandemic, this coronavirus thing, which is why we were all on Zoom and not in a pub somewhere. It's all a hoax. It's created by China. It's just a tool of control by the government. And again, like, you can definitely look for, the ways in which governments and systems are actually holding us down, and even more so in this pandemic. But that's not it. And that's what I mean by the kind of there could be a kernel of truth in there, but if you're not willing to tell people they're wrong.
Yeah, this is why I would want to understand why people think the way they do. So I know people who think that this is a Chinese hoax, and that it's it's all some sort of great conspiracy or whatever. I think these are all people who've never had to kind of project manage anything that feels like a conspiracy because they don't know how impossible that would be. But yeah, the interesting thing about those people is why they feel the way they do. They've been shown certain information by people with vested interests. They've been lied to. They've been deceived. And when they can see that, when they can see the deceit that they've been faced with, when they can see the kind of underlying racist narratives, all those sorts of things, then they move away from those viewpoints. But it's not. It's I think in the UK we had this big problem around Brexit where we all became really polarized and really kind of good or bad, depending on whose viewpoint you sided with. And of course, it was never as simple as that, because there were all kinds of complicated reasons that people thought the things they thought. And the more that things were decreed as good or bad by one side or the other, the more people entrenched themselves. So I think it's really helpful to be open and discursive about stuff. It's just like you would with a child. You would want to understand why a child thought something they did, and to discuss it with them. And that I guess saying that, hearing myself say that, sounds really kind of patronizing. But it's not meant in that way.
Yeah, because I think I get on this kind of thing. It's interesting because like how you were saying, you've kind of gone on your kind of like journey of like, you learn one thing and then from that thing you learn like something else. Going back to, our bizarre tangent about flat earth, actually what you'll find with a lot of kind of like conspiracy theorists is that like they believe flat earth because if you already believe that the government is run by a race of lizard people who are out to like whatever the conspiracy theory is there, it's not actually the biggest leap to believe that the earth is flat. So actually in that kind of thing of we'll talk to them like children, well actually they have kind of put in the same amount of effort as we have as you have in terms of like going on that journey of belief. They've just gone in a different direction. Yeah, and
that's true. I think to some degree, it's not true for everyone that I've known. A lot of people who I know haven't really researched things. Well, what they've considered to be research has been like watch some YouTube videos or something like that, which is not how I would understand research. However, does that mean that they've not got any valid concerns or any valid critiques of the system or whatever? Absolutely not. It's just like, people who support Trump have got massively valid critiques about the way that they've been disenfranchised and the way that systems have been rigged against them. Liberal economics has been hugely destructive towards them. Do they have they come out with a point of view that I would support? No, they haven't. But do they have an important point to make? Yes, they definitely have.
My concern with that is that those people in 1930s Germany had some valid concerns about the situation they were living in, and then they scapegoated Jews. Mm-hmm. And at that point, I don't want to talk to them like children. I want to smack them like children. And is there not a strong response required sometimes, rather than a discursive one?
I mean, I'm not a big fan of hitting children.
Maybe you haven't met the right ones.
Don't get into this argument with Jonty. Just having been here before, don't get into this argument with Jonty.
Yeah, fair enough. fair enough. But I just want to make that clear from my perspective. I mean, I'm a pacifist, so hey. But okay, so yeah, 1930s Germany. Wow, absolutely. What a horrendous situation, particularly for the Jewish people and for a lot of other minority groups. What a terrible thing that was. Were there particular economic situations and structures that led to their persecution? Yes, there very much were. Was it the legacy of World War One? Yeah, it was. What was the legacy? Was that the legacy of imperialism? Yes, it was. All these kind of things. Did it lead to something unutterably terrible? Yeah, it certainly did. Do I want to smack the Germans for that? No, not really. Do I want to stop? If I was given like a time machine, would I go back in time and stop Hitler? Yes, of course I would. But all of these things are contextual, aren't they? They're all products of a particular context. Would the Jews have been subject to that kind of persecution had the context not been there for Hitler and his poisonous ideology to thrive? Then I would say not. So.
It's an unfair question.
Was anymore.
It is an unfair question. I think it's because when a lot of people started turning to the BNP, you had a lot of, I think, very nice liberals saying, well, listen, we mustn't be too down on them and their racist opinions because don't you know they've been disenfranchised. I'm kind of like, that's fine, but they have picked the wrong ideology, and I think we should be brave enough to say that racism as a reaction to it isn't okay, and we should be willing, in a kind of maybe in the spirit of dialogue, to say that rather than to just go, whoa, well, they're working class, so I guess it's okay whatever they believe, because that can lead to such terrible things. I think that's my concern with that kind of approach.
I mean, there are obvious difficulties with taking a dialogical or discursive approach, but that doesn't, I think, mean it's wrong. Should any view be enforced on other people? I think there are difficulties with that.
I'd agree.
And I think on the flip side of kind of what you've just said, Jonty, I think it can go too far in that direction, because the stuff I see in terms of like cancel culture in the world that we're living in at the moment I find frankly terrifying. It's awful, of the idea of that sort of being like, well, this opinion that you have is not okay, therefore we are going to end your entire career and like your prospects. Like, I think it is, on the one hand, yes, it is important to be able to, it is okay, I think, to an extent, to be able to say, no, you can't hold this opinion, but also it can go too far.
Yeah, and for me, sorry, go, Simon.
No, I was just going to say it becomes about power, doesn't it? It becomes about the desert temptations. It becomes about all of those kind of things that we all know are the key sort of drivers, and that have been written about and spoken about for thousands of years. Yeah,
because ultimately it's not about. I wouldn't want to stop somebody from holding it or force something on anybody, but I would want the full freedom to tell them that they were wrong in really strong terms, which is maybe that's just such a classically liberal approach.
The Jonathan Langley story.
That's fine, so long as you can accept a kind of a rebuke from them on the things that you're wrong about.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's the key, isn't it? If we can all be honest with each other and say, look, you're wrong about that, and they say, and you're wrong about this.
Yeah, it's just really hard to take them seriously when they believe that there's a conspiracy of Jewish people out there trying to destroy the world.
I mean, it might be difficult to take that seriously, but it can be quite easy to take it seriously when they're worried about their local neighbourhood and the problems of rising crime in their neighbourhood. And if you can work with them on that, then they're usually a lot more kind of open to discussing bigger issues.
Yeah, that has not been my experience, but yeah, that's.
I mean, that's. I'm just speaking from my own lived experience, I guess, and that's deeply contextual, obviously. So it's probably very different. But as I say, the people that I've worked with for a large part of my career now have spanned the political spectrum from very right wing to very left wing, and I find that when they are taken seriously and when they are listened to and feel heard, then they're much more willing to engage in dialogue than if they're just told straight off, sorry, but you have no valid opinions because of your reprehensible ideas about people of a different skin colour to you.
Yeah, I got to say, growing up in apartheid South Africa in the white middle class and therefore the elite, I don't know if I could imagine a more heard group of people.
Yeah, and that's the thing, isn't it? So I'm speaking out of a place of enormous privilege, and I am not a person of colour, and I'm not. I've got all the privilege. I've got every single privilege going pretty much. So all my opinions are formed out of that, and as much as I can do to listen to others who have different experiences, I can only really speak out of what I see, and I have to do that in the knowledge that other people see very different things, and I've got to listen to that.
When Jesus said, "I am the way and the truth," what do you think he meant by that? And do you find it uncomfortable? Are you embarrassed by that claim?
No, I mean, I'm not embarrassed by it. I'm the way, the truth, and the life. Yeah. Do I know what was meant by that? Do I even think Jesus said those words necessarily?
I had a feeling you were going to say that.
I mean, we're getting into some territory, some serious territory. To try and sort of address your question at face value, in the first place, no, I'm not embarrassed by that, nor am I embarrassed by any of the stuff in the Bible, even the stuff that I really dislike in the Bible. I would just ask that whenever we think about those kind of things, we really unpack what we think they might mean. And no one comes to the Father but through me. Well, what does that mean? Does that mean that, for instance, to use a kind of evangelical mindset, you have to commit your, say the right prayer or say the right phrase or whatever it might be, commit your life to Christ, and then you are allowed into heaven? Is that what that means? In which case, there are lots of problems with that, aren't there? For people who were born before Jesus, or people who die as babies, or people who, there's just billions of problems. And then we start going into kind of gymnastics to say, this is how we deal with all of those exceptions and all that sort of stuff. So I think we should just be a bit more honest about it and say, I think there's an awful lot to unpack here about what these things mean, and perhaps we don't have as good a handle on it as we would like to. Do I think that it's vitally important? So that, I guess that's maybe the area that I would most significantly differ from an evangelical on. Do I think you need to give your life to Christ in a kind of come to Jesus moment in order to then get some sort of ticket to heaven or something like that? No, I don't think that makes any real sense at all, and it conflicts with my idea of what God is or who God is, all those kind of things. So I know I'm being elliptical in terms of your question, but it doesn't embarrass me. It just means that I want to discuss what those things mean rather than just give a pat answer.
Yeah, I hear that. I guess I'm curious as to whether you think Jesus celebrated plurality to the same degree that you do.
I think Jesus probably celebrated it more than I did, more than I do. I think Jesus was incredibly plural in the way. I mean, he all of the people he encountered who were of different, philosophies or religions or whatever, and he didn't seem to be interested in trying to convert them to his own brand of Judaism at all. The sort of one of the first encounters for the young Jesuses of the blinking Magi, right? I mean, however you want to take that story. Yeah, I mean, we won't go into that right now. But this idea that everybody has to sort of conform to a particular type of early Christian Judaism or whatever it was just doesn't seem to have been part of Jesus's thinking at all. Samaritans, yeah, fine. I'll work with those guys. Romans, yeah, good, yeah, no problem. Whoever doesn't seem to be an issue.
What's so special about Jesus? Because you seem to like him. You seem to be pretty fond of Jesus. Why?
Yeah, I'm hugely fond of Jesus. If that's a strong enough term, I don't think it is a strong enough term. I think that Jesus is extraordinary and amazing, and that's because of the way that Jesus modelled a way of thinking and a way of living that is so powerful that it resonates today. There's very few people that could even hold a candle to that. 2,000 years down the line. So yeah, I think that what Christianity does in that sense is builds a movement on this kind of incredible set of teachings and insights. That I think it's a mistake to say that it's about starting a religion. Jesus never seemed to be interested in starting a religion. It's a way of treating people, of seeing people, of being with people, that is just kind of earth shattering, earth shaking. Everybody can learn from it. I don't really know what else to say.
I just, in terms of the way of being and a way of treating people, and just like what what are your favorite parts? No, but like in terms of your understanding, because of this plurality, I want the listeners to understand what it is that you see in the way that he treats, in the way that he models.
So Jesus is is kind of the embodiment of love, really, which is that's the great thing. Love, justice, mercy. All of these things that we are told are the fruits of the Spirit of God, and this is where Jesus kind of excels and demonstrates a way in a very short space of time. It has to be said. I mean, I would have liked. This is version on blasphemy. What I'm about to say now, but I would have liked to have seen.
Well,
Jesus
because nothing before has.
Wait, have I said something controversial yet? I thought I'd been on the kind of safe path. Darn. I'm so used to my own kind of heresy that I don't recognise it anymore. So, what was I saying? I would have liked to have seen Jesus have a longer career. That's what I was going to say, because how do you sustain that? How do you sustain that over 10 years, 20 years, all that kind of stuff? His career was too short. Unfortunately.
Yeah, unnecessarily cut short. I mean, who needs atonement? Short. Like, what a waste of time that was when he could have helped more people.
What do you think atonement is then? That's interesting.
I knew you weren't going to let that one go. I knew you were for a second going to let that one go.
I find atonement a really interesting concept, so I'd be interested to hear what you think atonement is.
Oh, me also. Yeah, we covered that back in when we were in the C.S. Lewis pub, didn't we?
Actually, yeah.
Atonement theory.
Damn it. I missed it. I don't know.
It's all right. I don't have a lot of memory of that particular recording.
Yeah, to be fair, Laura was hammered, so yeah, that was
really. So this is the funny thing, right? So you guys are the beer Christianity thing, yeah. And Jonty, I often mock you for your kind of swearing and all this sort of stuff. Now, I'm the most like straight edge kind of guy you'll meet. I don't drink, don't swear. Been married since I was 20. You know, I'm like the most kind of straight up and down white guy you'll want to meet. And yet the funny thing is that you know, somehow it's me that's the outsider one. It's a strange thing to me.
You're pretty punk, Simon. That's the thing. You are pretty punk, actually. Like in the way that you are. Yeah, I mean, like I
mean, he used to be a punk. I don't know if that counts.
Well, that would make sense, really, especially if you're straight edge. That would make a lot of sense.
Yeah, I guess that's why I use that language, isn't it? I thought about it.
Yeah. No, I mean, like, so for me, I find myself like I'm about to be grilled by a bunch of conservative white South Africans next week on a podcast of a dude that I know as a representative of Marxism. And I definitely don't know enough about Marxism to be this guy, but essentially I'm basically a dialer lefty that they're going to use as a punching bag.
Great.
And they're going to be significantly brutal with me. And the dude who's hosting it is like, also, I'm not going to defend you because I don't agree with you. And I was like, awesome. That's great. So like to him and to so many of the people I know, I am you.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, you are.
And yet, you know, to you, I'm obviously a representative of kind of, you know, quite right-wing evangelicalism. So I'm just like,
yeah. I mean, I don't think of you particularly as being a right-wing evangelical as such. I think that we probably have different ideas about you know, the nature of God, the nature of Christ, all those kind of things. I don't think it matters, though. Maybe that's the difference. I don't think it matters.
I found your just that phrase, the blessing of plurality, so unbelievably encouraging and hope-filling in that kind of second half of life way of just like, we don't have to convince everybody to believe the same thing and to be the same thing. We can actually... And in language that I would use, I can see God working in ways that at some points in my life I would find anathema. I can see God at work in things and people and even ideas that are conflicting, and being able to let go of some of that stuff and say it's not just relativism. It's much deeper than that. You know, it's not just convenient. We don't want to have the argument. It's actually God and truth. It's even more than that. It's more complex. It's that it is that beautiful blessing of plurality, that there are multiple ways of being that are okay. I think for me, the places where I become uncomfortable, because I am post-evangelical in so many ways in terms of how I genuinely feel about things. I worry about what we lose if we're not careful.
Sure. What are you worried we will lose? What?
Truth.
Okay.
Truth.
What
I worry that it gets hijacked by power. I worry that
can never happen, surely.
No, I know that would never happen, and Christianity's never experienced it, obviously.
No, 2,000 years.
No, not once. My concern is that it's like when people say, you know what, we just need the government to get out of our way and let us be free, you know? And I'm like, that's cool, unless you've recognized the power of multinational capital. At which point, actually taking away the stuff that you think is holding you down makes a way for a far more profound form of tyranny and oppression. I worry that by going, guys, we really need to stop being so polarized, and we really need to stop drawing lines that tell people that they're wrong. The vast majority of hearts and minds and people will get hijacked by something bad, like you've seen happen to American Christianity. And I know that didn't result from let's everybody just get along. That resulted from the opposite.
Yeah.
But I see just the same potential there. And I want to be able to hold on to things and to go, if your vision of Jesus says, I think he probably favors the billionaires in this case, I want to say you're wrong, unless you're talking about cutting off their heads, and which is probably on their side. And, I'm open to the complexity. I'm not open to it being simplified down to something that it doesn't seem to have ever been intended to be. Does that make sense? Is that a legitimate fear?
I guess I think in one sense all fears are legitimate, and in another sense no fears are legitimate, so I don't really know how to answer the question. I think it comes down to how you understand God, what your perception is of God, how you understand the ways of God to unfold, all those kind of things. I guess that I would always want to encourage people to follow the ways of Jesus. I wouldn't necessarily expect them to start engaging with all Christian dogma or anything else like that. I don't think they all need to be baptized. I think all of these kind of things, these religious rituals that we've formed, have just become kind of little kind of inside outside, club type things. I'm just deeply unconcerned about this sort of this idea that we all have to adhere to a particular strain of Christianity. There are lots of types of Christianity, lots of types of belief, and they all have great things within them. And I think if we're all working towards the same basic direction, then we're good.
I'd be with you on that 100%. I think we need to come to the end of the podcast.
Can I tell you a quick story before I finish? So I was at a academic theology conference a while ago, and I had to give a paper straight after a Dutch Reformed theologian, a really clever, good, sharp guy. But he and I were not on the same page. And he was sat in the front row while I was talking. And one of the things I talked about was the zombie church. And he kind of ripped into me afterwards in a fairly nice way, but still ripped into me. Anyway, I went and sat down afterwards, and a lady came up to me and said, "You seem to have a really good heart." It's like, wow, okay, that's that. These are not my people. I'm going. Nice. It's terrible.
Simon, thank you so much for talking to us. If you're listening to this and you want to hear more, you can go to beerchristianity.libsyn.com. You can find us on Twitter at beerxianity, and do get in touch with us via email if you want to use an old school email address, which is beerchristianity@yahoo.com. Simon, thanks so much. How can people get hold of your stuff? Where do they go on the interwebs?
So you can go to simonjcross.com. I write a daily email that goes out to subscribers, 3 paragraphs, 7 o'clock every morning, full of interesting, sometimes challenging, sometimes infuriating stuff. And currently I'm running a project called Liturgy in a Dangerous Time, which is a weekly publication for people who are looking for stuff to use in their homes or with their friends or whatever while we're all on lockdown.
Brilliant. Thanks so much for your time, Sam. We can stop these recordings now. Simon, that was so cool. Thank you, man.